Imagine this. You are enslaved, yet every day you are trusted to steer a Confederate warship, loaded with cannons, guarded by soldiers, surrounded by enemy guns. One mistake, one curious glance from a sentry, and you're dead before sunrise. Now imagine stealing that ship, sailing it through 9 Confederate forts, past the muzzles of 100 cannons, and handing it straight to the Union Navy, with your wife and children hiding below deck. That's not a legend. That's the true story of Robert Smalls, a 23-year-old pilot who turned his captor's arrogance into his greatest weapon and rewrote his destiny in a single night. They said no enslaved person could escape Charleston Harbor alive. But before the dawn of May 13, 1862, Robert Smalls would prove them all wrong. Charleston, South Carolina. 1862. The air smells of salt and smoke. The clanging of ship bells mixes with the chant of dock workers and the crackle of distant artillery. The Civil War has split a nation, and Charleston stands as its beating Confederate heart. Here the sea is both lifeline and prison wall. Along these crowded docks, a young black man moves among sailors and soldiers. His back is straight, his expression calm, his eyes always watching. He knows the tides, the stars, and every shoal in this treacherous harbor. His name is Robert Smalls. Smalls was born into slavery in Beaufort, a coastal town framed by marsh grass and magnolia trees. His mother, Lydia, worked in the house of Henry McKee. She saw the gentility shown to white children, the hunger and fear endured by her own people, and she vowed her son would never be blind to that contrast. When Robert was just a boy, she took him into Charleston's markets to witness the auctions, families torn apart, mothers screaming as the hammer fell. Those sounds branded themselves into his memory. From that day forward, freedom was not a dream, it was a debt he meant to pay. As he grew older, Robert was hired out to work in the city. Each dawn he labored on the docks, hauling rope, loading cargo, earning coins he would never keep. But the harbor taught him secrets. He watched the river pilots guide ships through twisting channels and memorized their gestures, the subtle turns of the wheel, the whistle codes that spoke in language of fog and steel. He learned faster than anyone expected, and soon the overseers trusted him with small boats. In the rhythm of tides and currents, he found a kind of order that no master could control. By 20, Smalls was recognized as one of the best pilots in Charleston's fleet, though the title meant little without freedom. His wages went straight to his enslaver, yet his mind remained his own. Around this time he met Hannah Jones, a hotel maid whose laugh carried through the bustle of the wharves. They married in secret, a union of hope in a city built on despair. They dreamed of buying their liberty, even dared to negotiate the price, $600 for the family's release. It might as well have been $6 million. The offer was mocked, refused, forgotten. Smalls learned that day that no coin could purchase dignity from those who profited by denying it. Then came the war. The sound of cannon fire from Fort Sumter rolled across the bay like thunder announcing a new era. Charleston transformed overnight into an armed camp. Confederate banners rose over every fort. Steamers carried troops and weapons to the islands guarding the harbor mouth. Robert Smalls, now an experienced pilot, was assigned to one of those vessels, the sidewheel steamer Planter. To the Confederates it was a workhorse, ferrying supplies, guns, and messages between the forts. To Smalls, it was both workplace and prison, a wooden cage afloat on the sea that represented his only hope of escape. Each voyage deepened his understanding of the harbor's defenses. He memorized the password flags, the watch shifts, the changing patterns of light from tower beacons. The officers joked about his skill, never imagining he might use it against them. Knowledge became his armor, patience his weapon. At home, Hannah listened as her husband whispered impossible dreams. One day, he said, the tide will be right. She would smile faintly, part in faith, part in fear. For every rumor of escape carried an echo of death, names of those caught and executed, warnings meant to break hope before it could take root. But Smalls' hope only sharpened. He studied not just the sea but the men who claimed to command it, their habits, their arrogance, their careless certainty that their world would last forever. Night after night, he stood at the wheel of the Planter, guiding her past the same forts, the same lanterns, until he could have sailed the route blindfolded. What no one saw was that he was drawing a map in his mind, a map not of geography but of opportunity. Somewhere in those patterns of guards and signals lay the path to freedom. And so begins the quiet countdown to one of the boldest acts in American history. Spring 1862. Charleston Harbor breathes war. By day, the Planter moves like a servant between the city and the ring of Confederate forts. By night, she sleeps beside the dock, silent, guarded, seemingly secure. But Robert Smalls has been watching, counting, waiting. He knows which officers drink late, which sentries drift into conversation when the moon is high, which signal flags hang limp in the wind before dawn. Every tiny weakness becomes a stroke in his invisible blueprint. The men who crew the planter with him, 8 enslaved sailors, share the same unspoken hunger. Each has a wife or child somewhere in the city, each carries a name that could be erased by a single musket shot. Yet each nods when Smalls whispers, "Soon." The plan forms in fragments: steal the ship before dawn, pick up their families from the North Atlantic wharf, sail straight through the guarded channel, pretending to be the Confederate officers, then run for open sea in the Union blockade. To outsiders it sounds like madness. To Smalls it's mathematics, timing, courage, and tide. The officers of the planter are predictable. They leave the ship each night to sleep ashore, confident their enslaved crew would never dare move her an inch. Their arrogance becomes Smalls' permission slip. On the evening of May 12, 1862, the harbor air feels heavy with rain and smoke. Smalls pilots the planter on her usual route, delivering guns to Fort Ripley, dispatches to Fort Sumter, then returns to the dock. The officers disembark, laughing, leaving their uniforms behind. They tell the crew to guard the ship and not to wander. Their footsteps fade down the wharf. Smalls waits. The city bells mark 11 o'clock, then 12. The harbor stills. Only the slap of water against the hull breaks the silence. He moves quietly to the captain's cabin. There, hanging from a peg, is the gray coat and broad-brimmed hat of Captain Riley. Smalls lifts them with trembling hands. The wool smells of sweat and tobacco. He puts them on. In the dim light, he catches his reflection in a small mirror, an enslaved pilot disguised as a Confederate officer. Tonight, he whispers, "We are free men." At 2 a.m. the crew unties the moorings. The paddle wheels churn softly, muffled by darkness. The planter eases from the dock, its chimneys barely whispering smoke. The men breathe as one, every sound amplified by fear. First stop, the North Atlantic wharf. There, in the shadows, the women and children wait, Hannah holding their daughter, Elizabeth. Another sailor's wife clutches a sleeping baby. No one speaks. They are lifted aboard, wrapped in blankets, hidden below deck. Now the real journey begins. Smalls takes the wheel. Ahead lie 9 forts, each with soldiers trained to shoot anything that moves without the proper signal. He adjusts his posture, mimicking the captain's stance, his hat pulled low. The tide runs high, carrying them toward the harbor mouth. At Fort Johnson, a sentry calls out, "Where are you bound, planter?" Smalls answers in a steady voice, echoing the tone he's heard countless times. "On Confederate business, taking dispatches to Fort Sumter." A lantern swings. The guard waves them through. The crew exhales, but only for a heartbeat. Ahead looms the black silhouette of Fort Sumter, the fortress whose guns had started the Civil War itself. It is the final and most dangerous checkpoint. One false signal and every cannon will open fire. Smalls lifts the Confederate flag they've kept aboard for weeks. He raises the correct pattern of bunting, white then red. The wind catches it, fluttering in the faint starlight. The sentry hesitates, then answers with the proper code. The planter steams forward, unchallenged. Behind them, Charleston sleeps, unaware that its own vessel is slipping away, carrying people it once claimed as property toward the promise of freedom. When the last fort fades into darkness, Smalls lowers the Confederate colors and orders the Union flag, one he had secretly sewn from scraps, to rise. The dawn wind unfurls it above the ship. For the first time, sunlight touches it. He points the bow toward the horizon, toward the faint line where the Union blockade waits. But freedom is never without risk. The Union ships have orders to fire on any Confederate steamer approaching without signal. From the distance, the planter still bears the enemy flag on her smokestacks. Smalls knows this. He orders a white bedsheet hoisted high, Hannah's own bedsheet, now transformed into a flag of surrender and hope. Cannon crews aboard the Union ship onward prepare to fire. Then one lookout shouts, "Hold! They're flying white." Through the spyglass, Captain Nichols of the Onward sees a young black man standing proud at the wheel. The steamer slows, engines hissing as Smalls guides her alongside. He salutes and calls out, "Good morning, sir. I've brought you the planter and all her guns." The Union sailors stare in disbelief. Within the hour, the story races through the fleet. A group of enslaved men have stolen a Confederate transport and delivered it intact. Cannon crews cheer. Officers shake Smalls' hand. His wife steps from below deck, tears streaking her face as the reality sinks in. They are free. Truly free. The morning sun rose over the Atlantic, glinting off the planter's wet decks. The men stood silent, half laughing, half crying, still afraid to believe what they'd done. Robert Smalls, hat in hand, met the Union officers aboard the Onward and told his story as calmly as if it were a day's routine. But every man listening knew this was something more than courage. It was genius born of desperation, discipline, and unbreakable will. The planter was turned over to the Union Navy, her cargo a treasure trove of Confederate codes, maps, and guns. For the North it was a stunning gift. For Smalls it was a beginning. The Navy hired him on the spot. Soon he was piloting Union vessels along the same coast where he'd once been enslaved, now as a free man, a paid man, and a hero in uniform. He guided the planter and other ships through perilous waters, under fire, serving with distinction in nearly 20 missions. Soldiers and officers spoke his name with respect. The same hands that had once been bound by chains now steered ships that fought to end slavery itself. When the war ended, Smalls did not fade into history's background. He returned home to Beaufort, the very town where he had been born in bondage, and bought the house of his former enslaver. Some said he bought it out of revenge. But Smalls lived there with a quiet sense of victory, turning what once symbolized oppression into a monument of perseverance. He taught himself to read and write. He opened a general store. He helped establish schools for newly freed children who had never before held a book. And then, he did something few could have imagined in those turbulent years after the war. Robert Smalls entered politics. First in the South Carolina legislature. Then as a United States congressman. The boy who had once stood barefoot on a dock, waiting for permission to breathe, now stood on the floor of the U.S. Capitol, speaking for those who had been silenced for generations. His speeches called for equality, education, and opportunity, for a South rebuilt not on hatred but on hope. In his lifetime, Smalls watched Reconstruction rise and fall. He saw progress and backlash, victories and betrayals. But through it all, he never surrendered his belief that courage could shape destiny. Years later, when someone asked how he found the nerve to steal the planter, Smalls answered simply, "I knew what I was. And I knew what I deserved to be." Those words echo through time, quiet, steady, unshakable. Because Robert Smalls' story isn't just about escape. It's about vision. About patience. About daring to believe that the world can be remade by the hands of those once denied its touch. Today his name still sails quietly through history, rarely shouted but never forgotten by those who find it. And maybe that's the truest mark of greatness, to change a nation not by rage but by resolve. So the next time someone tells you the odds are too high, that the system is too strong, that the door will never open, remember the man who stole a warship before dawn and sailed it toward the sun. If Robert Smalls' courage made you feel something, drop a comment with one word: respect. Because stories like his deserve to be remembered, retold, and shared far beyond textbooks. Hit subscribe for more untold history that still beats in the heart of freedom. And ask yourself, what's the harbor you still need to cross?